My name is Henrietta Thies. This is for BIB 360, Instructor Paul Meyer. This is on the healing of Simon's wife's mother, found in Matthew 8:14 through 17. All the narratives in Matthew's text demonstrate Jesus' power and authority given by God the Father and carried out through his instruction of service to others and love. Who would you rather count on than a trustworthy individual whose powers and affection knows no end? Jesus is in Capernaum, and just as he had finished freeing a man from an evil spirit, he left the synagogue and goes straight to Peter and Andrew's house. With them were James and John, as told in the book of Mark. Jesus' picture in Matthew is different than the miracle stories that came right before this one. It depicted Jesus displaying immeasurable influence through his instruction and his ability to cast out an evil spirit. In this situation, Jesus is portrayed as a normal human being. A man walking home with his friends, entering the home where he stayed, ready to relax and eat something. When Jesus learns about Peter's wife's mother lying in bed with a high fever, Jesus shows concern and goes to visit her, something any parent or friend would do about someone they loved, reminding us that God is both human and divine. Let's read the passage from Matthew 8:14 through 17. When Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and began to wait on him. When evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him, and they drove out the spirits with a word and healed all the sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. He took up our infirmities and bore our disease. But I also wanted to read the book of Mark, the same story, Mark 1:29-34. As soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. He went to her, took her hand, and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. That evening after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, and he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. And then the last one I wanted to read was Luke, because Luke's story gives us a little bit more insight on more detail on what was going on. Jesus left the synagogue and went to the home of Simon. Now Simon's mother-in-law was suffering with a high fever, and they asked Jesus to help her. So he bent over, and he rebuked the fever, and it left. She got up at once and began to wait on them. At sunset, the people brought to Jesus all who had various kinds of sickness, and laying his hands on each one, he healed them. Moreover, demons came out of many people, shouting, "You are the Son of God." And he rebuked them and would not allow them to speak, because they knew he was the Messiah. So as we compare these three accounts, we can clearly see the differences in each account. After all, three people can witness the same circumstance and situation, and each of them will draw out what they remember. Even though these stories are out of the Synoptic Gospels, meaning they share similarities, but yet they are different because of their different focus of who Jesus was. Matthew saw Jesus as the Messiah. Mark saw Jesus as a servant, and Luke saw Jesus as the Son of God, Jesus' humanity. In Mark's story, Jesus went up in silence and took her by the hand and raised her up. Luke states that Jesus rebuked the fever, so he spoke to the fever and emphasized the different character traits of Jesus. In the Greek, rebuked is called epitemism. It is a word that indicates a command by God or by his spoken person, in this case it's Jesus, so strong it causes evil to be forced into submission. Mark details that the mother-in-law was inflicted with fever, while Luke, a physician, recalled it being a high fever. During this time, 3 different fevers were known in that day. The Malta fever, the symptoms were weakness, anemia, and a wasting away. It lasted several months and could result in death. Intermittent fever, which is today known as typhoid fever, but also malaria, a mosquito-borne disease that was produced in the floodplains of the Jordan River, an issue many Galilean villages faced on the waterfronts. Luke makes it clear that as a doctor we can determine that the fever was debilitating, as the woman was so sick that she was unable to get up, suggesting that it was really bad, or maybe even life-threatening. During these times, they did not have the luxury of going to bed when feeling sick. Matthew focuses on Jesus' authority and now begins to share these miracles to demonstrate Jesus' right to interpret for God. He heals with a touch or with a word, unlimited by distance, healing those who have faith in him and those who have been ensnared by evil spirits. Jesus ministered in a private place, a home, not in public like we saw before. Not many doctors or faith healers today would make a personal visit to someone's home. Luke verse 31 points out that it was a Sabbath day. In Jewish culture, people could not lift anything on this day, which included those who were sick, because it was against their beliefs. There is nothing in religious documents or in the Old Testament about healing by touch. This approach Jesus took revealed a new illustration of an outward flow of divine power and a soft side or tenderness of Jesus. He shared the loving touch of his Father's hand. Matthew tells us that he healed many. Nothing was too hard to bring to restoration, and no illness was out of his power to cure. God's ability to do miracles in our own lives are done in silence and in everyday circumstances. Matthew uses the story of the centurion to show us that healing can take place as a result of faith. Peter's wife's mother shows us that service is a result of what Jesus had done for her. This example in Matthew should move us to get up and serve. When Jesus' touch reaches our lives, Matthew recalls Isaiah 53 to provide us with a view of complete and ultimate fulfillment for our salvation from wickedness, and a redemption that offers us freedom from any human imperfection. A promise that will be ours through Christ's atonement. Matthew offers 3 insights from this story. Jesus healed many. His ministry and his mission remained the same. He came to proclaim the kingdom of God and to call every human being into it. His ministry was not selfish or insignificant, but we must set boundaries for ourselves, and we must allow God to take us to other places. And our response should be to go and serve.